Hey everyone, welcome to the Respect the Math podcast brought to you by Reliable Tech Help. For all your IT needs, call Reliable Tech Help at 502-797-7399 or visit our website at reliabletechhelp.com. That's reliabletech, T-E-K, help.com. I'm your host, Digital David Snyder. Here at the Respect the Math podcast, we talk about everything from technology to business, science, popular culture, and more. Basically, the things that I'm interested in because I'm kind of selfish that way. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and podcast apps from Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, iHeart, and others. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, please comment, please share. We'd love for you to interact with us. Find us online and do that, please. Today, our guest is Justin Zegart. He's a new team member with Reliable Tech Help. He has a background in project management and all things IT and digital consulting. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for being here, Justin.
Absolutely.
Tell us about your background and what kind of made you think about shifting to a different way of doing business in the IT consulting space.
Sure. So I had experience mostly in corporate to large to medium sized organizations, but most of my experience was mostly self-taught. I was very fortunate in that I had a lot of mentors. So starting this, I want to give thanks to everyone that has helped me throughout this journey, because that's kind of what it is. And really, those are the people that'll never want credit, nor will they ever desire to get credit for things. And it's like, that's why I feel the thanks is even more important.
Okay. And how long have you been doing it?
So my passion for technology began when I was a kid. I built my first computer mid-90s, got on the early BBS systems.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah.
ANSI graphics.
Yep.
What was our baud rate at that point? 26 something?
96. I remember I got a 28.8 and I was like, I'll never need anything faster. And then 56K with the V2.
Sure.
Ding.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've got two of these. I'll never need anything faster.
Sounds like a drunk fax machine when you're connecting, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it doesn't know where the digital signal begins and the analog ends. Yeah.
So give us some context there. Roughly 20 years ago, or?
Yeah. So it was about 20 years. Essentially so it's kind of interesting. I've kind of gone full circle in that I noticed that the home user market in general, just people that were home users could not get service for decent rates at all. And this was back to early 2000s. So I just started by word of mouth referrals, finding people that needed stuff done. And I just knew how to do it. I'd been helping people with essentially tech my entire life. I was teaching different teachers in school how to do things, just because for some reason, there was a stigma and they didn't like to feel vulnerable. But if I was a kid showing them, they would let down their guard and actually learn some stuff. So it started at a very young age. Yeah.
So for as long as you can remember, you've been tinkering and configuring and setting up.
I was, many thanks to my parents, because I probably drove them nuts with all the things that I, sort of dismantled and learned how to, there was one rule though, and it was a really great rule. And it's that if you take something apart, you need to know how to put it back together and it work.
Mm-hmm. That was a rule they set for you?
Yeah.
I like that. Kind of give you some guardrails to
keep
it. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing is I would look at something and I'd be like, okay, I know I could take this apart, but can I put it back together?
Yeah.
So, and that spark kind of got me into essentially building my first complete PC when I was about 8.
Wow.
My parents were I was very fortunate. They helped me source the parts.
Yeah.
We did, it's kind of like a zombie build. This is back when Compaq.
Frankenstein computer.
Yeah, it was like taking a power supply from a Compaq and then, finding a Mac piece that probably would never work in anything else.
If you can remember them, give us some details. Were we processing in megahertz at that point?
Or
was that kilohertz?
So my first build, I think, was like a 386.
Okay. And that would have been megahertz, right?
Yeah. And then 486. And I remember it was like 266, the AMDs with the tri-core.
That's a blast from the past.
Or sorry, there was some kind of overclock gate that.
Did we have kilobits of RAM at that point, or?
I don't know if we had kilobits or megs yet, but I remember that I had someone I knew had a 1 gig hard drive.
Oh, and that was a big deal.
Unheard of.
Absolutely.
That was that person was set for life. And as now we look at a gig and it's that's one. A couple seconds audio in some cases.
That's a fraction of the storage on our phone.
Oh yeah.
Which is really a supercomputer sitting in our pocket.
Which is, and me thinking about back then is I always wanted something like that. Now it's it's a whole other sort of can of worms.
We take it for granted every day. We use
100%.
it. We get mad at Siri when she doesn't answer us in like half a second.
Or if the map doesn't refresh right away, then you pass the turn. Right? Yeah, it's not instant. Then like people forget that we used to like go to MapQuest and get directions and print them out, and then have your person like you had to have a co-pilot back then. Like on like doing all kinds of road trips. So
so that kind of covers your background when you were a teenager. I'm assuming you went to University of Louisville like I did.
Yep.
Yeah, and tell us about your educational experience and your credentials there.
Sure. So I was one of I joined a program. It was a FBI NSA compliant computer information security.
Wow.
In the wake of like everything that had happened in the early 2000s, DHS and a few other groups had set up these programs where you would learn like advanced cryptography. You would
was
learn
this through the university?
Yeah.
The business school or the engineering school?
So it was through the business school, which was very rare. I was not expecting that. I was actually going to go for essentially either some kind of possibly like CS degree or something like that.
Computer engineering, computer science.
Yeah, but when I really thought about it and I really put it through my head and I was like, okay, a company, I could be super specialized and get that degree, but am I going to be useful to an actual organization when I get out? And I saw friends that were getting out with 6-year degrees and they couldn't find jobs because they were overqualified.
And I've heard that the technology is evolving so fast. It's an exponential climb. Mm-hmm. And you could spend 4 years of college specializing in something really good. And by the time you get your degree, it's obsolete. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like that. So you need a more broad education. And thankfully you got that, right?
Well, exactly. And really, this is the advice I give to anyone. If, don't let anyone try to convince you that you can't understand tech or work in tech. And, the college degree is not what helped me work in tech. It was getting on the ground experience, like seeing what can go wrong and how it can go wrong.
So you ended up with, I'm assuming, a CIS degree from the business school at U of L?
Yeah.
And so talk about the business aspect of that. I'm sure you took micro and macroeconomics and some accounting courses and stuff like that. Talk about how that complemented the technical side of learning CIS and brought you where you are, to where you are today.
100%. So great example is when I was doing cross-functional teams and bringing together like finance, sales, and accounting, I could speak their language because I knew, again, it was older knowledge, but because you're right, by the time you get out, the knowledge is already gone.
But at least it doesn't move as fast in the accounting and finance world. As
the accounting, FIFO, and LIFO, those are going to be the same ordering.
First in, first out. Was it GAAP generally accepted?
Yeah, generally accepting. And then all that fun and to all the CPAs out there, I don't know how you do it, but God bless you.
Thank God you're there. Yeah. So that made you very well rounded. That kind of dovetails into your professional experience. You're not just an IT guy in the weeds dealing with all the technical ins and outs of IT stuff. You're also managing projects. You're leading people, correct? You're on the, we'll just talk about it, the project management and the people interaction side.
So essentially, I was very fortunate, and the business school had a program. Specifically, they had a different path that was for project managers. And I had an amazing teacher, and I was taught, all the basics of project management. Now, I was very much an unofficial project manager. It was that no one would usually stand up to say, okay, I'm going to be the technical lead and I'm going to manage the project because somehow I think that that's sane. Yeah. In hindsight now, I'm like, probably should have had a project manager for that. But
did you get volunteered or?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Well, and really what it was is, I would go into like various places, start out at like, just like networking or something like that. And I would learn everything that they had, study up on it. And once I would go through that, then I would just, I would see all kinds of things that I could fix. And so I would just, work with management. And essentially what it would be is, I think the easiest example of the kind of projects I'd work on is there'd be a building. So there's like a merger and acquisition or something like that, right? Or but some company buys another company. I'd be the person that they would send in to be friendly, obviously, go in there and, we're not talking hostile takeovers or anything like that.
Right.
But go in there, see what their needs are, see what is their current setup, and make recommendations, but also inform all stakeholders. Meaning like when I went on these sites, that was my family. Like I was going there to find, and relate to new members of that family, and very much involving, I always realized like early on, when you involve the people that it's going to affect directly in the decision-making process, it gets much better.
And when you take the time to care enough to meet with these people from different backgrounds, and who serve different roles in the company to learn to meet them where they're at, understand them, relate to them, and say, hey, we're making some changes. Let me reassure you, this is going to be good for everyone.
Exactly.
And I'm very impressed with that because you obviously have a technical mind.
Yeah.
And what we found in our space is it's very unusual to find someone who's gifted technically and can also talk to people. I mean, that's a big deal. I tell folks when they come, we've had some interns work with them, like, look, I can teach you a lot of tech stuff. That's not a big deal. But learning how to talk to people, I can model that for you. But you either have to have a little bit of ability in that to begin with, or you have to be very willing to learn. And it takes 100%. Time. Yeah. And that's one of the things, many things that were appealing to me about you as we got to know each other and brought you into the team is that you genuinely care about the people you're working with and working for. And it's not just, hey, look, I'm just a tech guy. Stay out of my way. Let me do my tech stuff. No, you're going to connect with people. You're going to relate to them. You're going to collaborate.
Oh, 100%. And really for me, I'm, in hindsight, I really realized that it's relationships. Relationships are what matter. And I should have identified that earlier on. And, I always tell people, it's like, I'm not saying don't burn bridges. There are some situations that are very toxic, and for your own, safety or for your own mental health, you may need to distance yourself from stuff.
Yeah.
But try not to burn bridges. Build roads.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned the word relationships. That was very appealing to me. I'll paraphrase this, and then you can expand on it. You mentioned to me that, look, I'm tired of being treated as a number by these large corporations. If I leave, they'll just find someone else to dump more work onto, and then they'll ask that person to squeeze the people underneath him to get more productivity out of them, lay off this person, overwork that person, give people 2 or 3 jobs when they should be doing one kind of thing. And that really burns you out, and you lost that connection, that personal relationship. Look, you don't have to be best friends and hang out with everybody you work with, but you have to have a certain level of common ground that you can relate to each other from, and they should be invested in your success and your happiness and vice versa. Can you talk about that? Because that's something we do here at a much smaller company on a smaller scale that I think was appealing to you.
Well, and you kind of nailed it. See, for me, it's, what made me enjoy the work that I was doing was the fact that I got to lead teams like that and see people grow personally, professionally, and get to experience that. And really, a lot of it is not just really related just to specifically project management, but definitely you get into areas like emotional, knowing where people are. And because what you're hitting on is key is that for me, it's, something that was really resonating with me is, to meet people where they are, not necessarily where you think they should be or where you want them to be. And also interacting with people without any preconceived notions of what will be or expecting anything from them and accepting them. And I think that's key, because when I look back on it, the relationships are the things that I still have from all that work.
Yeah.
Working, 60 to 80 hours a week and stuff like that. I'll never get that time back. Those relationships though, I still have.
Yeah. And I like that sentiment there. We're a 2-man show before you came on board, so we're going to be a 3-man show very, very soon. And I would hope David Hastings, the guy who works with us, good friend of mine, privileged to know him as a person, but also to work with him. He's that rare example also of someone who's gifted technically, but can also talk to people.
Oh, 100%.
He's so good at making people feel calm when say that they've gotten hit by malware in the form of ransomware. He'll come in and calm them down and say, look, we can probably figure this out. If not, we might have to pay some small ransom or figure out a way to decrypt your data. He's so good at connecting with and relating to people, and that's just very rare. And that's one of the several things I'm excited about working with you with, is that you're able to do that. I would hope that David Hastings would say that, even though we're doing business together and the majority of our interactions are business related, we are friends. We don't go out and shoot pool or whatever, but we hang out occasionally. But I would hope that he would say that I as the business owner, treated him as an asset, something to invest in and not to take from. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
And it's a very, what you hit on is key, is that when you become a number for any sort of company, when that happens, you're losing a lot of things that you don't realize. You're losing your agency, you're losing your voice, you're losing your happiness. And that, really brings us to burnout, which is, burnout is so dangerous that I really do feel that, companies should be not just like reactive on this. They need to be extremely, trying to get ahead of it, because I don't think I've worked a job in any company that I did not see or experience burnout myself.
And they don't realize that it's in their interest to prevent that.
Correct.
It's not just, oh, this is our employee, let's take care of him. No, this is a symbiotic give and take relationship. If I invest in Justin, he's going to want to invest in me. After he invests in me, there's more that I have, I can invest in him, and it goes back and forth, right?
Exactly.
I don't say that people work for me. I don't have employees. I have team members.
Yeah.
If you're working for me, that means I'm working for you. We're both invested in each other's success. You mentioned burnout. I want to talk about that because, like you said, you haven't worked in that environment where it either wasn't you getting burned out, or if it wasn't you, it was somebody you knew. And you've seen it firsthand over and over again, and all the manifestations that can take. When you mentioned that, before we talk about it, alcoholism came to mind for me. It's like we've all been there. Like, you don't know exactly how many drinks it's going to take you to cross that line where you're going to have to make no plans for the next day and sober up and all that. It's kind of like burnout, right? You don't realize it until you've already crossed that line where you're already burned out. You're physically exhausted, emotionally, psychologically. You've probably formed a lot of resentment too, I would think, right?
Well, and that's really one of the biggest things to, you got to find some forgiveness for yourself. Like, when you really, like, because you just kind of hit it, by the time you're burnt out, you're already past the point of where you could have likely stopped it. And I'm not saying to not give people hope. What I'm saying is recognize the symptoms earlier. And again, some basic things to look for is, frequently, like, if you're tired, exhausted all the time, you've got demands that are made of you that are unrealistic for any human being. And really what you were talking about earlier is, is your use of substances going up? Are you drinking more coffee? Are you drinking more liquor at night? Are you doing things like that? And then looking at that in its whole, you can kind of see like what's going on. But it's key because you're right. Once you've gone to the point of burnout, you're already burnt out. And so from there, it's healing. And really, it involves a lot of self-care, self-reflection, and really just kind of burying all hatchets. Like, I think that's crucial. That kind of mindset, because when you get into it's someone else, it's not me, that's a clever way to go into some forms of like, sort of like trying to act like it's not as big as it is.
To minimize it and try to rationalize it.
Exactly. And really that gets into another thing, is that most of the burnout that I saw was the internalized failure that people felt, like that I felt. So just to give an example, like if there's a project that didn't go well, and that one person's module of that project, and I would see them like, they would beat themselves up more than anyone could ever like put them through, because they cared. And so but that's the thing is, when you notice people that are burnt out, it's because they care.
Right. Interesting. You notice that.
Yeah.
Not too many sociopaths getting burned out, right?
Right.
They're pretty good at taking care of themselves, and probably they're the ones probably burning out the majority of the people who actually care, like you said.
Exactly.
Yeah. In that sense, you mentioned listen to your body. When you said that, it triggered the term biofeedback. What are some actual physiological, biological symptoms that you'll see? Will you see racing thoughts or anxiety? Probably digestive issues, I would think, because you're nervous, and you're probably not, when you're in that burnout phase, you're probably not eating healthy. You're probably not working out. You're probably not sleeping well. Can you talk about that? Because your body will tell you pretty clearly, right?
And that's really what it gets to, is that you'll like rebound insomnia is very, very, very common. So
talk about that. I haven't heard that term before.
Sure. So when you go through like rebound insomnia, let's say like you were treated by a doctor with medication, and the medication worked and you were able to sleep for a few days, but then you stop the medication, the insomnia will come back even worse than it was before, because you haven't addressed what caused the insomnia. I'm
familiar with that phenomenon. I've never heard it labeled rebound insomnia. I learned something. Okay.
Well, and the reason why I like that label is because it kind of says what it is. It's, it's the rebounding. You've only like put a bandage on it. You haven't fixed what's causing that, but you hit on some main things, and that's that frequent, being tired every once in a while is something, but the problem with burnout is you're in a fight or flight mode, because you've been put in that with the anxiety and the fear. And a lot of it comes down to fear-based reinforcement and stuff like that. I'm not good enough, or, I'm not good enough for this. I don't deserve this. This is all my fault. All these different things that we tell ourselves. It's important of just breaking that cycle.
Yeah. And it's so easy to wake up 6 months down the road and realize for the last 3 months you've been neglecting your health. You've been eating a bad diet, not taking care of yourself, and probably from a social standpoint, probably not as connected to your friends and your family outside of work. And those are all essential things to help you find balance and happiness, right?
And that's really another one of the signs is, if you notice yourself not calling friends on their birthdays or, making excuses like I'm too busy, that's one I used to do all the time.
Yeah.
And because that's key is because when you're burnt out, there's a lot of guilt too that you carry during the burnout because that, you could do things a certain way, but you feel trapped but you don't see the trap. So when because you don't see that trap, you just keep walking back into it.
I heard someone say it's hard to read the label on the jar when you're inside the jar. Have you heard that?
Oh, no, that's, that's it. And that's it and more.
Yeah. You mentioned guilt. I would think if it's not guilt, it's some form of resentment. Think about how much the combination of those two in varying degrees ruin people's lives. I mean, we all know that person who was a company man or a company woman. They worked 35 years for Philip Morris or whatever it might be. And they come home and they've got this nice 401k balance and a pension and all that, but they're miserable. They spent 30, 40 years of their life doing something justified primarily by money. Yeah. Right. There might be some status that goes along with being an executive or, a prominent person. And, but outside of that, they've basically traded away the best years of their lives or the majority of it
100%
for a financial. And then here's the thing. My dad's an example of this. He came home and retired and did nothing. He was dead in 2 years. Yeah. How sad is that?
That's surprisingly, that's very common.
Particularly in men, but generally
in men too. Yes, I've been reading that when people reach retirement, it's like they feel like a lack of purpose. And that gets to burnout too, is I realized the cause of burnout for me was a lack of general purpose on what I was doing in my life. And it's because I didn't have a healthy source to pull from. So I was disconnected from, just like you mentioned, family and friends that could have pulled me out of that situation. I used the work as an excuse for everything. Like, oh, my health is bad, but it's the work. Yeah. So it comes down to that game.
Yeah.
Really, it just takes a lot of reflecting on oneself and really just asking yourself, again, it comes down to you got to be able to forgive yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. They say charity starts at home. I think everybody has to look deep inside and try to be honest with yourself and get some objectivity and some insight and say that, most folks that treat other people bad have negative opinions of themselves. And that could be for a number of reasons.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. We were talking briefly about the specific symptoms of burnout. Let's transition now into how do you pull yourself out of that hole? What are some concrete steps you, as someone who's dealt with it quite a bit, has taken to climb out of that hole, see some light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully learn from it so that you don't repeat those same gradual steps down that staircase into, burnout?
Absolutely. And so, really it comes down to, for me, it was, exploring myself, really asking myself, what makes me happy? And going back to basics, first principles type thinking, what makes me happy in life? Mm-hmm. And then going back to the first principle, okay, is it about happiness? And that's when it kind of clicked to me. I was like, when I really think about my entire life, when I was most on paper, quote unquote, successful, that was the most miserable I ever was in my life.
Wow.
When I was making the most money and I was comfortable from a money standpoint, I had no life.
Yeah. Like
60 to 80 hours a week and then being on call. Essentially at that job, I was on call 24/7. I would be on paid time off and they would call me in on paid time off.
That's outrageous.
Oh yeah. I remember one time I worked 10 to 12 hours. I was supposed to be on vacation.
I would think that a lot of hopelessness and helplessness was involved in.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And one thing you run into with people who exploit other people is there's never enough. They always want more. You got to stop and you're like, man, I've given this, like you said, I gave this company 12 hours on my vacation day. What else do they want? It seems to never end. They're never happy. They're never satisfied. And it's one thing if you're being, for a season if you're working some extra hours to help the company.
Or if there's a large project and like something completely out of, no one could have predicted something like, and I've done this before. Something's happened where someone's had to drop from the project, and then I just say, okay, I can't do their job role as good as them, but I'll take over their work just because there's no other way to get the project done. But when you're doing that every single project,
all the time,
and it's really, you kind of hit on something key, and that's that. What I tell people is that to figure out if you're in a state of burnout with your employer, I never advocate for any kind of hostility or anything like that. But what I do advocate is find a small line that you are just not willing to give up. Maybe they want to change your lunch break to a different time period, something that should not matter at all, something that should be very minimal, and just push back on it. Stand up for yourself.
Yeah, you'll find out where you stand if you draw that line, right?
100%.
Yeah, you mentioned there was an inverse relationship between on the surface where you looked most successful by those standards, but deep inside you were equally unhappy as you were successful on the surface.
100%.
Yeah. The idea of money, how many people are justifying work that they're not interested in, they're not passionate about, they don't love it, they actually dread it, right? Kind of the thank God it's Friday, oh God it's Monday crowd.
Yep.
9 to 5, living for the weekend types. How many people do that their whole lives? And the money is nice for a little while, but just like everything else, the law of diminishing returns kicks in at a certain point. And when the money doesn't give you that same sense of...
there's only so much stuff you can buy.
Well, there's that. Yeah. And then, like you said, you had to take a personal inventory. What makes me the happiest?
Oh, 100%.
You mentioned specifically the inverse relationship between your professional success and your underlying happiness. Can you touch on the opposite of that? So when you were most happy in your life, what did your life look like? What were things you were doing every day? What passions were you pursuing? What dreams and goals did you have? Can you talk about that?
That is a great question. So it really comes back to me going full circle, and that's that I really realized it goes back to relationships and the relationships with all of my clients that I'd had over the years. And again, like if anyone's getting into any kind of relationship, not just like management, but any kind of like IT consulting or things like that, do you deal with other people? I offer this as advice for everyone. Call up your clients and go to see them. Do not make it business related. Just spend some time with them. Just find something nice you can do for them or something like that. People like that to me is like if someone does that for, like, I always think, what would I like someone to do for me? And like knowing that someone cares is very huge right now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of loneliness just in general. And so it's just key.
Have you heard Zig Ziglar said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care?
No, no, that's good though.
Yeah, I like that. It's really refreshing to encounter someone like yourself in our space specifically that is a sensitive person and cares about people and doesn't want to just see what they can get out of a connection with someone. They want to invest in that person.
Exactly.
And you said you've called people that you've worked with over the years just to say hello and reconnect, and there's no professional or business motive there. It's just in your nature, and that's who you are. So if we could summarize your answer to my question about when you were the happiest, what that looked like was deeply connected relationships, not just professional, but personal, friends and family outside of work kind of thing. What are some other things? Were you more active exercise-wise, or was your diet better? Or I'm sure it had to be more.
Oh, yeah. So
what other components contributed to your happiest point in your life?
This actually brings up something great, and that's that, one thing with burnout is either, and it seems kind of paradoxical at first and counterintuitive, but either a lot of weight gain or a lot of weight loss.
Okay. So you cycled.
You cycle in one direction or another. So my weight gain, I was up around 350, 360. It was like a whole other, like I'm almost half the weight of that person.
Wow.
And the reason is I was not taking care of myself. I wasn't eating proper. And it just, that stuff builds up. And it really goes into like the whole phenomenon of burnout is that it really does come from when you feel a lack of care for yourself and you let that spiral out, then that lack of care will just become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And it'll manifest itself in overeating.
In every relationship as well, and your reactions. And really, I think it's hard to forgive from a standpoint that when you really think about what you're doing. And that's why I think it's so crucial, because you got to forgive yourself. Like, no one's perfect. We all mess this up. That's the greatest part about life is, taking your mistakes and learning from them.
Yeah, I like to tell people that a winner is someone who about 50% of them becoming a winner was their victories, but the other 50% was the lessons they learned from their losses.
Exactly.
And a loss only turns you into a loser if you don't learn something from that loss. I think that's an important distinction. I didn't want to bring this up because we've talked about it, but you brought it up, so I think it's fair game now.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you did, because I think the weight loss and the struggle with weight and diet that you've dealt with can impact someone's life who's listening. So if you don't mind, can we talk about that for a few minutes?
Absolutely.
So at your peak, you were 350, you said.
About 350, 360. Okay. I was about to be put on all kinds of medications.
About what age were you when you hit that peak? Approximately.
Say around 30, like mid-30s.
Okay. And I'm assuming this is something you've struggled with for a long time.
Weight issues had been a massive part of my life. Really, I had an unhealthy relationship to food. I think most people kind of do to an extent. We just like to try to kid ourselves. But, I know everyone's heard about like different diets, things like that. The trick that I learned, whatever diet you do, just is if you stick to something.
Right. That's the tricky part.
That's the trick. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just sticking with it. So at your peak, you were 350 and you're about 6'3", 6'4". Okay. So you're a big guy anyways.
Yeah.
But you didn't let that be an excuse. You realized you had a problem and you want to be on medication for the rest of your life and set yourself up for all the comorbidities of obesity and diabetes and heart disease, COPD, pulmonary issue, all that stuff goes hand in hand. What was your AA calls it bottoming out, right?
Yeah.
Hitting rock bottom. What was that turning point for you? Can you describe that?
That is a great question. So I think there were a few, but it was really just being so unhappy and not understanding, and then going to the doctor and then finding, I'm going to be on some horrendous medications with horrendous side effects, that I was in fact pre-diabetic, like almost about to be, moving on that path.
In your early 30s, which is
absolutely bad.
Cutting decades off your life, right?
Oh yeah, and I had like high blood pressure, and I, had all different kinds of issues. And, really what helped me is looking at food differently, understanding the nourishment aspect, not like the way I treated food when I was, super busy. Like I was saying, I was so miserable. Is like food was just like I had to get something in so that I could do the work.
Gas in the tank.
Yeah, it was gas in the tank, and that was it.
Yeah. You weren't looking at it as a garbage in, garbage out type of thing. You put something down your throat. What if it's bad? What comes out is bad. If it's good, what turns out is good.
Absolutely.
And so you had to change intellectually and psychologically your relationship to and your understanding of food.
And really, like and just so everyone knows, to explain what I did a combination of intermittent fasting, which is just a fancy way to say like you could do like 16 hours a day you don't eat, and then the other you do eat, right, during that period of window. Which has well documented health benefits. Well, because it helps your body balance glucose levels. Like if people have, I used to suffer from rampant hunger pains. So bad to where people could hear my stomach in the office and be like, you need to go eat something. Like that's how bad it was. Yeah. When I got on keto, I haven't had hunger pains since I've been doing and essentially if people want to know, there's all different ways to do keto. I just do I just call it a whole foods diet, not Whole Foods, the store. It's too expensive. Yeah. But I don't eat things that I don't know what they are. Yeah. So reading the side of a thing, if I can't pronounce it and understand what that chemical is, I will not buy it.
Wow. Yeah, you're very selective. I offered to bring you some food today before our meeting today, and you said, well, as long as it's not processed and it doesn't have bread in it, sure. I was like, well, I'm going to Subway. So I don't think that's an option. So I want to dive more into the details of that, because I think we have a really good chance to help someone, maybe even more than one person, turn their life around and say, wow, that guy was 350 pounds. He's 6'3". What's your weight now?
About 170, 180.
So you literally lost half of a human being.
Half a human being, yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about, by the way, congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
That's an amazing accomplishment, seriously. And we'll kind of talk about it in the sense of like recovery from alcohol and all that stuff, because it's the same thing. You can plug in alcohol, weed, drugs, pills, weight, gambling, addiction, whatever it might be, right?
Shopping.
Yeah. So how long have you been sober in the sense that you've got a grip on your diet, you redefined your relationship with food, and you're at or near where you're at now? How long have you been sober in that sense?
So in that sense, I'd say it's been about 4 or 5 years.
That's incredible.
I'd say, but really to be fair, it'd be more like 3 to 4. But really, the main thing that I would like people to know is it's not the length of time necessarily. It's what you're doing with that time and how much progress that you're making. Don't expect that you're going to do one thing and everything's going to magically work the next day. Be prepared to fail. And
wait a minute. We live in the Western world. You're telling me I shouldn't expect instant gratification?
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't want to do it. Go ahead.
You sound just like me.
Yeah.
But and it's sticking to it. And really it's, don't see things as a restriction as much as possible. See them as a challenge. So I do that with keto.
Opportunity.
So exactly what I do with keto is because you can't have sugar, refined sugar, I find natural sweeteners, which are better for you anyway.
What are some examples of those? Give us some examples of natural sweeteners.
There's a sweetener called allulose. It's ALLOUSE. I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but it's from fruit rind. And then there's monk fruit, which is a very famous one. There's is
stevia an example? Or?
Stevia is sort of, there's some debate on that, but one's to avoid,
though, isn't it?
avoid saccharin, avoid aspartame, which will give you, I think, brain tumors in that one.
I've heard that, yeah.
It's and it's really also, there's people that are sensitive to things in that, phenolphthaleins, or however you pronounce that. But really, so doing that is because my first thought was, I'll never be able to have bread again. I was like, there's ways to make keto bread. It sounds nuts, but it's usually just apple cider vinegar and instead of normal flour, it'd be like almond flour or something like that.
Yeah, I heard a doctor say recently, whether you have a gluten insensitivity or not, no one should be eating gluten.
That's the way I feel, and I did make my switch over to gluten-free, and I did notice an immediate change because I had suspected something like Crohn's or there's another one with the C, celiacs. And I'd suspected that was an issue, but again, this relates to burnout too, is that with burnout, digestion is normally one of the first signs. And this is what I want people to think about is if you visualize work right now, and your stomach just churned, you're probably burnt out.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it doesn't take much to figure out those not so subtle cues that your body and your mind are sending to you, right?
100%.
I mean, if you're yawning all day long and you're sucking down power bars and Red Bull just to get through your day, you probably need to take a personal inventory, right?
100%.
And see, what are you doing diet-wise, exercise-wise, work-life balance is a big one.
100%.
Yeah. So let's get back to the 350 pounds. So you lost half of yourself. And don't talk about anything you're not comfortable talking about. But is there anything in your, growing up as a kid, did you get bullied in school? Did you, you're taking this inventory of yourself. You're making these life changes. Did you find anything that happened to you that you kind of internalized and then externalized in the form of having an unhealthy relationship with food?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of it was, my parents did an amazing job, and they did everything. They always made sure to put food on, made sure that we were fed. But when, and you'll notice this in certain families, but food is very much like, whoever gets the food first eats the food, right? Things like that. So some things like that definitely play a role. And I think just most people in general, we tend to have an unhealthy relationship with food overall because we become detached from the source, like where it was from, like where it was raised and where it's from. And whenever that happens, it develops into a very unhealthy type of situation. So for me personal, I definitely think there's some stuff for sure. I think and everyone dealing with things will notice something from their, distant past or something that affects that. But for me, it was more not understanding food, and really
ignorance.
Yeah. It was complete ignorance.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And we had Dr. Mike Norman on the show a couple months ago, and he's a chiropractor, but he also focuses on holistic approaches to health and healing. And he was talking about if you had any idea about what they were putting in most food that we eat every day, you would throw up. He was like all these, and it goes deeper than that. It's not just the processing part of preparing the food and distributing it. It goes down to what they put in the soil where the crops are being grown, what they're spraying the crops with,
how they dry the wheat,
what they're force feeding the animals that are being raised in farming situations.
Yeah.
That was a real eye opener for me.
Oh,
He mentioned specifically we eat a lot of cows, particularly in this country. Steak, beef, hamburgers, all that kind of stuff. He said that we are force feeding cows to eat something they would not naturally eat.
Yeah.
And that's basically grass and grain. He's like, in the wild, they eat some of that, but they don't eat it exclusively. And so humans don't eat that stuff, if left to their own devices, going back to like a primitive setting, tens of thousands of years ago. But so if you eat something that's in turn eating something that's bad for you, you're eating what's bad for you.
100%.
And we don't realize that because of, farming is a big part of our culture and our agricultural system and the political system. And there's plenty of lobbyists and lawyers and corporations with vested interests in keeping it that way. Can you talk about, you mentioned you don't eat anything you don't understand. I remember that struck me when you said that. So you're literally scrutinizing, if you're looking at that.
I'm researching. So I found a chemical the other day. It was like a form of anything, anytime you see on a label and there's the word pyro, you should be concerned.
Okay, talk about that.
Obviously, that means fire, but so like pyrogenic effects, like things that can have different effects. But essentially, to me, it sets off an alert that something is reactive because it's got pyro in it. So it was like it was an ingredient that had that in it. I go look it up, and the FDA said that it is not to be listed in things called all natural. The product was literally labeled keto, all natural for keto.
Yeah.
And it was like, so it was violating FDA packaging guidelines. Right. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to call into where I got that from and try to explain that to like someone, but it was things like that were eye opening because I had gone so long with like, oh, well, the manufacturers can't get away with doing that kind of stuff. And then really looking into it, it's not saying like you need to be skeptical, like you can't eat like family cooking or like family cooked meals. Is like you've got to like be able to like be a little bit lenient on things like that.
You have to be realistic.
You got to be realistic, because otherwise you're not going to eat.
Yeah. What was it? The FDA. I mean, even those guys were bought and paid for by the farming lobby and big pharmaceutical and big tobacco and all those guys, right? I mean, how in the world is it illegal to smoke a joint and eat some Cheetos and go to sleep, but it's fully legal to get drunk off your behind, right?
Yeah.
And, do God knows what, get behind the wheel of a car, hurt yourself, hurt someone else.
And it really shows you that there's things that are sanctioned and things that are not. And it's always the immediate thing to me is, going through recovery and going through that process. And like most people that come out on the other end, it's kind of like with burnout. When you see it, like your immediate thing is you're like, I can't believe I did all this and all that. But when you really look at it and understand it for what it is, you can kind of understand it more and, really reflect on, how you got there for sure.
Yeah. And cigarettes. How in the world are cigarettes still legal?
And the fact that doctors used to advertise them for health, they would smoke them with Lucky Strikes, Freedom Torches.
They'd smoke them while performing operations and stuff. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
Because I think we're one of the few countries, Western countries, or I think only country that allows direct to consumer marketing of pharmaceuticals.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. That's been outlawed.
I have friends from like different places. They come here and they go nuts when they see that on TV. When they see like side effects include death, it's like if your product includes death as a side effect, or the antidepressant's side effect is suicide. How is that an antidepressant?
If you have suicidal thoughts, please stop taking this. The one that kills me. And I'm a bit of a sarcastic person.
Was it the dry one that caused dry eye?
No, it's far more depraved than that. Oh, wow. Are you ready? You'll know it as soon as you hear it, okay?
Okay.
Do not take such and such drug if you are allergic to it. Do we really have to be told not to take a substance that we're allergic to? Does everybody have to wear training wheels on their bike and a helmet until they're 35 years old? I mean, at a certain point, and I'm not trying to sound callous here, but doesn't natural selection and personal responsibility have to play in here? Do I really have to be reminded not to take something that I'm allergic to?
You really wonder. And then when you really look at just like, big pharma in general, and you just look at things like that, it's just, I feel that going natural, that to me is always going to be like, if someone offers me like, oh, you can take a Tylenol or you can take curcumin, which is just from turmeric, I believe. Yeah.
A natural.
It's a natural, source, it's in curries and
non-processed,
and in fact,
nutritional.
Yeah. And you take that and like, I take that for headaches, like maybe a little bit of pine bark, which is a natural, It's a natural blood thinner. So obviously if you're on blood thinners, you can't take something like that. But
Right.
Things like that, I do not take Tylenol. I do not take acetaminophen because that stuff's very liver toxic.
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, as soon as something synthetic like that hits your system says,
It
wait
freaks
a minute.
out.
Yeah, it's like, wait a minute, this is an outside source and it's not naturally generated. Let's start working the kidneys and the liver and overtime to get this out, right? I mean,
Exactly.
That's their job, right? Yeah. I want to segue to the idea of transformation. Throughout my life, I've done and said and thought many things that in retrospect I'm ashamed of or embarrassed of. I've burned some bridges in my life. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've done some things that I regret, and I hope that I've learned from. And the idea of transformation is very significant to me. Thank God for second chances. Thank God we live in a country and a culture where people can be redeemed.
Oh, 100%.
You can make a mistake, you can pay your price, and then you can move on and progress down the road, learn from your mistakes, and hopefully be successful. I find myself constantly trying to transform myself, whether it be to work out more, to eat better, to be a better husband, to be a better father, to be a better business owner, to be a better human being in general. I don't want to get political here, but when it comes to respecting human rights, this recent leak of the Supreme Court draft opinion of the a majority opinion saying they should overturn Roe versus Wade. We're not going to get into the political aspects of all that. I will say that as a human being who values human decency, human dignity, the potential in everyone, fundamental human rights, which should be the free speech, freedom of expression, freedom
of association,
freedom to practice the religion that you would like to practice or no religion, freedom to participate in the governing class, which makes decisions that impact us all every day, whether you want to be a politician yourself or support some campaign for a politician who's going to represent you. This Supreme Court decision is very troubling to me, only for one reason. And I think that we've come a long way in this country from the founding fathers' original vision of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Having government play as minimal role in everyday people like you and me's lives as necessary. Let us feel free to innovate and care for our families, to educate our children the way we want them educated, to participate in our communities and govern ourselves, and only really step in when we need help, right? Like, I'm glad we have the military to protect us. I'm glad we have the fire department in case my house catches on fire. I'm glad for those construction crews paving the road and filling those potholes, and I don't mind paying taxes for all. I'm fine with all that. But when it comes to transformation, you have to be, to a certain extent, in an environment that rewards transformation and makes it possible. And I just feel like it's kind of shameful that some of these rights that we've fought for so many, a couple centuries now, can be taken away by some arbitrary legal ruling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
With that, we're not getting political, and we're not going to take sides on that. I just wanted to mention that. Can you talk about the idea of transformation? Because you did it. I can't think of a more extreme example.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, I'm very impressed with what you accomplished. It says a lot about your ability to reflect on yourself and to have insight, and most importantly, to put in the work and sustain it. I mean, that's
the hard part.
I mean, you got to be in the top 1% of people who try something like this and actually sustain it more than 6 or 9 months. And you're 4 or 5 years into it.
Well, and that's the thing is, for people to understand, this is not my first attempt at a diet. I've been trying to diet since I was a kid. I had always had issues with being overweight. And again, like you hit on something earlier, I was bullied, but then I had my growth spurt, and then it could have gone the other direction. I didn't, thankfully, but they couldn't really bully me. I could just reach over and look down at them.
Smack them down. Yeah.
Yeah. Just be like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
But, and so really, there's someone will say, we'll never give up. And I agree with that, but also give yourself a break sometimes. When you mess up one thing, don't let that ruin your day.
Yeah.
Because that is so tempting, and it's something I struggle with to this day.
Yeah.
Is that one thing that I didn't do right, and then letting that cascade over me. And I really think it comes down to once you become more self-aware, and once you become less self-involved and more selfless.
Yeah.
it really becomes like more clear, who we really are. And that's, we're all, we're all one. We're all
in this together.
Exactly.
My actions impact yours.
100%.
And we should all be invested in each other.
Yeah. Well, and think about like what world do we want to leave for our kids or, our nieces and nephews, that's what really kind of woke me up on my journey was thinking about my nephews, the world that they're going to have, thinking about my nieces, the world that they're going to have. And that really sobered me up, like on so many levels. Like I was like, okay, I'm calling my own BS on all this stuff. I'm handling it today. And then of course, like me, I'm like, I'm going to get all this self-work done the first week. And then, letting one thing trip you up. It's important, hope is key. But also, don't haunt yourself. And I think this is key because I haunted myself for years. And what I'm getting at is that you're going to be your biggest critic out of anyone that could ever criticize you ever, because you know how to push your own buttons better than anyone else can.
Yeah.
And, people don't realize it, but you can gaslight yourself. And I gaslit myself for years.
The worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves.
100%. Telling myself I was happy, telling myself this is worth the money to do and not have a life. That I'm not going to have a life now for my 30s, but in my 40s, I'll be able to be an executive or retire or something.
Yeah.
And then really realizing, that's part of the burnout process is when the cynicism, and it's another key that I should have talked earlier, is cynicism. And I'm not talking like some people are just generally cynical, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But when it borders nihilism, when you hit that border is when you really need to step back and don't think that all this is going to get resolved in one day, and really just, show yourself some love.
Yeah.
You really got to, self-care involves, really finding some love for yourself. It's really hard to do and balance the line between narcissism for some people too.
You mentioned managing failure. I think I heard someone say failure is not final and success is not inevitable.
So my favorite in project management was, and management used to hate when I say this, but it was failure is always an option.
Yeah.
That would be how I'd start most meetings, because what I was getting at is that, most project managers don't plan for failure.
Yeah.
And it's not like I planned for projects to fail. What I'm getting at is that they do blue sky on everything.
Yeah.
And when they blue sky everything, when nothing even gets close to the sky, they freak out.
Right.
So instead of blue skying everything, saying, blue sky just being, this is the dream of what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
I don't know what you would call it, but it was,
get your head in the clouds, but your feet are still on the ground.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and it was more like I would go through, not necessarily like worst case, but I would always look at, this could fail, but we've got a plan if this happens. Yeah. And then that means that our team is more confident, so the chance of it failing is a lot less likely.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to segue to our the nonprofit that we started. It's called See Good to Be Good.
Yeah.
Right now, we're asking for folks who want to get involved in that to support our mission. They can certainly donate. If they choose to donate, it's seegoodtobegood.org. That's SEE good to be good.org. We'll certainly take your donations. If you do decide to donate, I want everyone to know that every single dollar that's donated will be given in the form of a scholarship that's needs-based for someone trying to go to college.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Even the expenses of running See Good to Be Good are all paid out of pocket by myself and the other people involved in it. So if you donate $100, $100 is going to a needs-based scholarship to help someone to go to school. Yeah, and so I just wanted to bring that up. But just as much as we would like money, we'd more like people who want to get involved and support the mission by donating their time, their efforts, their resources. So really if cool. If this connects with you, please reach out to us and interact with us. We'd be happy to take as little or as much as you want to contribute in whatever form you'd like to contribute to that. And part of that mission is to find out examples of people like yourself who've dealt with some adversity, have gotten over it, have found a way to be happy and successful. And I want people who are kind of lost in life, might be looking for an example of, someone doing it the right way, or some guidance or some mentorship. And so in that vein, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, okay?
Sure.
Number one, why are you successful?
Success is funny because what do you define as success? Like to some it'd be money. To me, success was an expense account, being able to get certain hotel rooms whenever I wanted, being able to,
frequent flyer miles.
And that was the dirty secret, is that I never got those honored because I was traveling for business. So obviously I'm flying on a business card, so I never got those.
What airport lounge club?
What airport lounge club? You've got the 18 medallion miles that I'm not even sure the requirements, but I think you have to circle the globe twice, once counterclockwise, and once
on
other
one
direction.
foot,
on one flight though, it's got to be a nonstop,
of course,
globe reversing flight.
Yeah, within a certain window. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
So insofar as you've been successful and insofar as you define success, why are you successful?
Success. So my redefinition of success is, and it leads back to what you're saying, is that how many people have I helped? And really getting the internalization of your past failures, your past self, all of that, and getting to your authentic self, getting to your, what I would call like Buddha nature, kind of sort of like Christ mind. It's it's your natural state. And really seeing that. And it's very hard. It was hard for me to understand what that was, because it's a construct we're not used to. We're not taught, look inward. We're not taught, to reflect and meditate. We're not taught.
We're taught to look good on the surface.
We're taught to like keep everything under the cover and then let it blow up, but only let it blow up on certain people. And it's like there's all these rules, and we never really like take the time to care for ourselves.
Drive that luxury car, live in that certain exclusive community.
And that'll get you by for, one day, maybe a week, maybe a weekend, but
it can't sustain you.
It can't sustain you.
Alone. There's people who have that are happy, but it's not because of that alone.
Exactly. Well, and if you notice, and this is, I don't like to be judgmental of anyone, but this is just something I've noticed, and I'm sure anyone that's consulted for all levels have seen this, and that's that you'll notice certain clients that are very wealthy, and it's nothing against them being wealthy or anything like that. But what it is you notice that there's a certain sector that the more wealthy they are, there's a correlation with, how miserable they just are about everything.
Yeah.
And,
because they've chased that exclusively.
Exactly. And they've internalized a lot of things, so they will project everything else. And then you just like, there's some clients that I just wouldn't, you see that and it's like, what do you say?
Yeah.
They
won't hear you if you say it anyway.
Oh no. And those are the kind of people you give them guidance and say, I would recommend against not doing this for X, Y, and Z. And then they do it. And then they literally have the same problems you told them. And again, that's the thing about relationships too, is that, don't try to like seek out toxic relationships, but know the warning signs. Like never extend yourself more than meeting someone halfway. Like I'm not saying that you can't balance a little bit more, but really it's, you shouldn't be exhausted. You've got to leave enough for yourself, because if you only do things for it, it's a fine balance to walk, because really a lot of it for me came down to, and, speaking back to transformation, is really thinking, okay, when I was feeling my worst, I was like, what did I do today to help another person? Did I make someone smile today?
I love that.
Was there a cashier that looked super stressed that I like, you'll just notice this the more you hang around me, but service industry, because I used to work service industry. I started out in service industry.
You have a heart for those folks because you know what they're going through.
More so that, and more so because one of my biggest pet peeves and just general turnoffs is if someone is rude to wait. If someone like a server
it's a privilege to have someone prepare food and serve it to you. Not it's not an entitlement. That's a privilege. To have that. That's great. I love that answer. Why are you happy?
So that has been something that is probably going to take me the rest of my life to find an answer to. But I will say that my levels of happiness have increased because of letting go of a lot of fear. And a lot of that fear was put into me just from our society. And we're never really, we're told we're unique, but we're never told why. And I think that the why you've got to answer for yourself. And the unique aspect is, what part of being unique is critical to you. And for me, I think, stepping into yourself, really finding out who you are is a very complex process. The self-work is going to be brutal if you're doing it right.
But the self-discovery, the why.
It makes up for it like hand over fist. And when you have those aha moments, and then really it's going to be, I'm not going to lie to anyone and play it down. Doing the self-work is one of the hardest things to do. It's why people don't do it. Yeah. Why you see it in AA all the time. The people that project and lash out are normally the ones that are in the meeting still using,
Yeah. You mentioned the why. The why arguably is a lifetime of self-discovery. Yeah. And it evolves, right? You don't just figure it out Tuesday of next week and then it's smooth sailing.
There's a great quote, and that's that you will not be aware of your own enlightenment
Okay. Yeah. And you shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
You should be
shouldn't
constantly pursuing enlightenment.
Because if the second you say you're enlightened, you're not.
And that's what I tell people. They'll say, are you a kind person? You know what I say to them? I'd say, first of all, it's very important for me to get up every single day and find one way, at least one way to be a better person, to be more kind, generous, and compassionate.
Yes.
But my second answer to that is, it's not for me to say. Ask the people who interact with me. Yeah. I would hope that they would say that. Yeah. It's for me to do, not for me to say, and for me to pursue and not to claim, right? Yeah. So we're in the same space 100%. There.
And that's my mindset too. And you really hit on something key, and that's that start with small steps. Like, you don't need to fix the world today. Like, that was one of the hardest things for me to get through my head. Was I was always like, I got to have everything sorted or I can't do anything. Yeah. And a small step like that is like, and I ask myself this all the time. It's, what could I have done better today? Not judging myself, not getting, completely immersed in it.
Healthy, constructive criticism and reflection.
Exactly. Yeah. And using that to gauge yourself and, say, oh, I can do a little work here, but it doesn't need to bother me for the rest of the night.
Yeah. Now that you're successful and happy to the extent that you are, what obligation do you feel to help other people as you pursue that path?
Specifically that. I feel that and this is really, it's key that I say this, and it's important to acknowledge for me, like to thank everyone who has gotten me to where I am, all the amazing people that mentored me, even the people that didn't treat me well. I learned just as much from them as someone who actually did in many aspects, because I knew what to watch for. Yeah. And really, when you look at life and you look at the relationships that survive and that stay with you, those are so beautiful. And like having people for my life that I know that, if they ever need anything, they could call me any day of the week. Like, I would go wherever they are, do it, just because we have been in situations to where that person had my back and I had theirs. And we didn't have to discuss it or debate it. We're decent people. We figured that's how everyone else operated.
Isn't that a great place to be, to have that, to know that you've invested in someone else and they've invested in you, and if the crap hit the fan one day, you'd go take it for them and they'd take it for you. That's a great answer. I like that. I would like to reiterate that Justin Zegart is the newest IT consultant here at Reliable Tech Help. Reliable Tech Help does sponsor the Respect the Math podcast. For all your IT needs, please visit reliabletechhelp.com. That's spelled reliable, tech, T-E-K, help.com, or you can call us at 502-797-7399. In keeping with that theme, you brought a few tips that people can do to instantly improve their security online and protect their information and their identity. You want to talk about those briefly?
Absolutely. So, and not to get super overtly technical, just to go over, you may have heard some of these buzzwords, but these are just some things that you can do today that are just for the amount of effort you'll put in this, you're going to get back a lot more. Cool. And that's looking into, if you've ever signed up for like a bank account or anything, and you've heard of multi-factor, also known as two-factor, where you have that one-time use, like string of numbers, and you put that in, turning that on and, using something I would recommend possibly, there's a great one called Authy is good, but using something like that and enabling that, it essentially means if someone took your account password, they wouldn't be able to log in without that code. So that step right there, it adds a second layer, and adding that reduces. It's called your attack surface, but it's just how vulnerable you are. It immediately will, it'll reduce that, and it's normally very simple for most services, and most services are actually now enforcing this.
Right. So tip one is turn on two-factor authentication for all your accounts.
And then the other part of that is to, if you've got all your stuff in a spreadsheet, all your passwords, is to start using a password manager and just have
something secure, encrypted, password protected itself.
Precisely. Something like a Bitwarden, LastPass, although I'm a little on the fence with them. Bitwarden's, for anyone who doesn't know, it's open source. I won't go into what that means, but it's inspected by lots of people. It's not made by a certain group to sell, although they do have a paid version. But the password manager, it's easier to remember one password that's super strong versus all of your passwords, and that's the advantage there. But the main one that I really think people should really think about is there's a lot of fraud going on right now. And really since, everything went down with the pandemic, I had noticed a spike in fraud. And a lot of this that I'd seen could be prevented with one simple thing, and that's if you haven't, look into freezing your actual credit. So freezing your credit, because you shouldn't have your credit open to have someone immediately be able to pull it at any time. There's just not a need.
Open an account in your name.
Open an account in your name, and also
change your title on your house. Do God knows what, right? Yeah.
And also opt out of pre-authorized credit card mailers. There's a form and a process you can do. And and I'll say I've got a guide on doing it, so maybe we can just grab a few things. But those are the main ones, because the main attacks that you'll see is people will go into mailboxes. They'll get the offers for the credit card and then start working through that person's ID. But just so, again, freezing your, freeze your TransUnion, your Experian, whatever it is.
Experian.
Yeah, because you don't need to be able to pull that at any time. And also,
you can also temporarily unfreeze it too if you need to apply for an account or something.
Precisely. Yeah. And that was the key moment that kind of hit me is, when I realized that, I don't need this open all the time. It's kind of like leaving your front door open all the time.
It's like having a door with a lock on it, never locking the door.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Any other tips, or is that?
Well, so that would be from the technical side. I would say, really some advice that I would really like to give for people is, just some sort of mantras that I have. And that's that, the person that looks for goodness in others will find it. Just like the person that looks for the bad in others will find it too. Yeah. It's about perspective, kind of like glass half full.
Yeah. If you heard the Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you think you cannot, you are always right.
Oh yeah. Well, and, the other thing is, when we come into times of all kinds of turbulence and like all kinds of just absolute chaos, really think about this, looking for the lesson hidden inside of what you're facing, like inside of the actual difficulty. So looking for the lesson there, because that was one that really took me a lot to learn, is that, maybe I'm being challenged with this one thing to be better at something later on. And then really, another one that's great is, don't let others define your self-worth. And just think in period, either monetarily or on a relationship level anyway.
Define that clearly from yourself and take ownership of that, because if you don't, someone will define it for you.
Someone will define it for you, and you will be way undervalued. You will
not like what their definition.
Oh, you will not like it at all. And, really, and this is what been one of the hardest ones for me is, don't internalize failure. Learn from it.
Yeah.
So failure is a part of life. And if you're always worried about failing, then you're going to fail even more because you haven't learned and taken the time.
And you can't grow without failure. It just 100%. Doesn't work that way.
I've learned more from my mistakes than my successes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thanks, Justin. I like to close our show with an inspiring quote. And those who know me know I'm pretty into physics and math and that kind of thing. Isaac Newton, arguably the father of modern science, arguably the greatest physicist and one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, when he was asked about his image later in his career before he died, he said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me."
I like that.
If you can't reflect on yourself and see what areas you're lacking in, life's going to be a rough ride. And this guy is arguably the greatest scientist / physicist of all time. And after he gave us gravity and calculus and the laws of motion, I mean, everything we needed to land a man on the moon, and set up the great minds like Albert Einstein and the quantum physics guys like Niels Bohr and Heisenberg.
I was actually there's a Niels Bohr quote, and that's, when talking about quantum, he said, mathematics are not enough. You need to use poetry.
Okay, I like that.
It's a great quote because what he's saying is it's
there's an art to it.
Oh, 100%. Because when you get in the quantum level, you're dealing with what should be paradox in some circumstances. But that'll be something for a whole other episode.
Yeah, we'll have to have another episode for sure. I just want to comment on that Newton quote real quick before we close things up here. If that guy, a giant and one of the greatest intellects in the history of humanity, says, yeah, I'm looking back on my life and I looked at this or that seashell or this or that pebble to find a nicer one, and the whole ocean of truth lie before me undiscovered. If he can do that, then certainly I can humble myself and try to be happy for the things I've accomplished and give myself credit for that. But keep in mind, the prize is still out there. Oh, yeah. And it would take a lifetime, if not more, to even make a small dent in understanding and experiencing all that's out there.
Well, and you really hit on something key, and that's that, a big change in my, life journey, kind of the arc on everything was I started becoming grateful and thankful.
Huge.
And that was a massive thing for me because I was, things were, when things were really bad, and just with that mindset, I was actually, instead of letting it affect me, I said, I'm thankful that I get to learn whatever lesson I'm going to learn from this.
Thankful that you're even aware of it.
Thankful.
How
Exactly.
many people have all these bad things happening to them and they're not even aware of it?
Because they're too distracted on, putting food on the table.
If you want instant gratification, do two things. Force yourself to smile and try to find one thing every day, a unique thing every day to be happy for, to be grateful for. I guarantee you'll get instant feedback on that. What a great way to end the show. I'd like to thank our guest, Justin Zegart, newest member of the Reliable Tech Help team. If you have questions about IT or any of the tips he gave us on security, please reach out to us and interact with Justin. You'll quickly understand after talking to him for a few minutes that he cares about people and he doesn't view you as a one-off transaction. He wants to invest in you and help you.
Exactly.
And also be doing business with you 10 years down the road because you have a relationship built on mutual trust and respect. Thanks for being here. If you would like to be a guest on our show or you would like help creating and or distributing your own podcast content, please contact us for more information. I'd like to thank our listeners and our sponsors for making this podcast possible and hopefully successful. And we will see you real soon in a future episode of the Respect the Math podcast. Thanks, Justin.
Awesome. Thank you.